Okay, welcome everyone to the Picnic Blanket Podcast, where we take you on a journey to explore food sustainability in the KW region in Canada through the lens of people care, earth care, and fair share. So my name is Ben Mueller, and I'm going to be your host today alongside Emma Baydal, Sarah Gajego, and David Asher to talk about the thought and creative process that took place while we look through part one of the book. So in this first chapter, we are depicting some poor relationships with food. So the goal of this first chapter was to really demonstrate how the core issues of food relationships and food systems for a contemporary family in Waterloo region. And this is why we chose to tell the story of an immigrant family, because that's where we're seeing population growth and kind of population increase. And what we wanted to do was show some of the issues that they are facing as a new family to the region that are really transferable to a lot of other families and kind of represent some of the larger overall issues within our food systems today. And what we're going to do is dig into a few of the symbolic elements that represent these issues just by taking you scene to scene throughout the book. So we enter the story now, and the kids are getting home from school, and the first thing that we see them do is try and make themselves a snack. And we see that the snack that they're reaching for isn't really that healthy, but it's kind of what's available until they get interrupted. So making healthy choices is a big part of our relationship with food and kind of the food that we choose to have in our house. But also, healthy choices are determined by the food skills that we have to prepare food. And so while food skills don't necessarily guarantee that a healthier diet, eating healthy is impossible without the right food skills to prepare the food. So they're making this food, and then they get interrupted by grandma, who comes home and offers to make something different. David, do you want to touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think this scene in the book is really interesting because we're seeing the kids in their natural environment and what their routine is like. And I think what we're trying to depict in this scene is visually we're showing the type of habits they have. They're reaching for the stuff in the cupboards. They're not opening the fridge. They're not running for fresh food items when they want a snack. And grandma is coming in and depicting and showing us that these kids are, that she's got something different to offer them. And it's obviously much better because they're interested in her snack. So I think, when we're getting to it, it's really interesting that we try to show what the kids are like and what kind of things that they already know how to do on their own. It's almost an outsider perspective, which is kind of fun. But I think it really helps show their lack of food skills, or their current lack of food skills at this point in the book. And it also shows that Granny's got some knowledge with her. So, and that sort of thing. So I think I think it's an interesting part of the book for sure.
Totally. And grandma sees more of this too. It's not she just gets home and sees the kids go for a snack, because all of a sudden it's time for dinner and mom and dad are home. They're gonna get their nightly routine, their meal going for the evening, and they're going for the kind of like the pre-prepared like frozen meals, the frozen pizzas, that kind of thing, to put in the microwave, which represents another kind of food skills issue. And not only that, when it comes time to actually eat their food, they're not paying attention to it, and they're kind of separated. And there's no sense of connection that they have. Sarah?
Yes, so for me, one of the things that I also wanted to mention is that not only are we seeing sort of like that lack of connection with the food, but then even like right at the beginning, we see the part of loneliness by showing that these kids have not made any friends in school. And so we know, I think we all know by now how important it is to have someone to sit at lunch when you're either in elementary or high school, right? So by adding that element and like seeing that the kids don't even have like someone to like enjoy the food with and like feeling lonely, then we can see how that even creates a bad relationship with food right at the start at a very young age for them.
Yeah, and if I could just touch on that, I think these kids, they, like you mentioned, Sarah, they're feeling lonely at school, and then they come home, and food typically would be a way that they would be able to connect with their family, but for them, they're still lonely at home because they're not sitting down at the table and spending that time to reconnect with their family after the day. And so I think Granny, that's what she's so shocked by, right? The kids go and eat in front of the TV, or they take the food to their room. And Granny is used to having a more traditional, having these food rituals of where the whole family comes together and they sit down at the table together. And so when you sit down at the table together, you're appreciating one another and their company, but you're also appreciating the food. And so when these kids take their food to in front of the TV, they're not really thinking about their food. They're not giving gratitude towards their food. And for them, it's just a mindless thing, right? It's, yeah, they're just expecting food and there's food, and they're not really thinking about what they're doing.
Emma, you really got me thinking about their current environment and how we were trying to depict it, and that what we've described so far is it kind of sounds like there's a lot of food garbage too around their kitchen, which we're talking about the waste aspect and how instead of spending time with their families, they're spending time around garbage. And I think that that's really, the imagery of that is important for us to understand that our homes could be filled with love and friendship and compassion, but when we ignore food and we think of it as something simple and quick, we're often left with its waste as well. And that includes our waste of our community, our family time, and the amount of garbage that fills up our space, thinking, and that's just a norm. And I think that thinking about their environment is a really interesting aspect at this point.
Totally, and it really connects with where they're getting their food from and the way that they're purchasing it, and how that kind of like creates more waste. Like, for example, Granny notices, look at all this food that's wrapped in plastic, and they don't know how to negotiate what they do with food waste when they're done eating these things. And by eating these diets, they're also creating more waste, just overall. Sarah, did you have anything to add there?
Yes, I just wanted to touch on the fact also that we have chosen a grandmother to come in and see all of these problems that are going on. And so I think that this element that it is a grandmother is something important because like she has probably seen, right, like how different our society used to treat food before, and how we have moved into more of a society where we're always like on the run, and like food is something that we sort of like put behind the scene, sort of as a background, and it's not like maybe like the main part of the day as to like before, like that's what like you were looking forward to, right?
Yeah, and I think that comes into where Ben came up with this fantastic title of the picnic blanket, because Granny is aware of the heritage and the times and the amount of fun they've had with this blanket. And every hole and stain represents a memory. And I think by her being being used as a device to help re-enlighten the kids to their cultural heritage, which includes food preservation. And I think that and also waste care, because our modern society is not doing the same thing that happened 50 years ago. And I think, Sarah, you hit the nail on the head by saying she has lived experience from this. And that's something that we should be tapping into more often. And I think that that's why we're trying to use this character, is that there are many of these knowledge holders.
And another thing that I wanted to add in regards to the grandmother is that, for example, in my family, I have seen how my two grandmothers have been the backbone of the family, right? They are the ones who usually bring the family together. They are the ones who, when you have a family dinner, it's at their house, right? And so I think that there's also like this important element that then it's going to be this grandmother who is gonna basically take and like look at this problem that we're seeing here, that they don't have a relationship with the food, that there's a lot of waste that is going on, that they're not even taking the time to enjoy the food. And then, as we will see throughout our history and like in different episodes of this podcast, is how this grandmother is going to be essential to like solve all these problems.
Totally. And we see that with her thought process as we get to kind of the back half of this first chapter. She starts to reminisce about when she was younger and what food meant to her, how preparing food was something done together in the kitchen with the family. It was a place to tell stories and share jokes. And it was a real kind of hub of community within the house. And as grandma leaves, this really starts to, it really sits with her in that her family is not experiencing the same things that she got to experience when she was younger, and she's worried about what this means for their health, not only physically but also emotionally and socially, which food touches all of those areas when we were thinking about how it touches like people care as part of our themes. And so she watches them make dinner, and she kind of gathers everyone together to kind of discuss about what's going on. This isn't at all how she remembered it to be. And when she wanted to help, there wasn't even anything in the refrigerator that she could recognize to help them cook with. And so this family doesn't have access to the same cultural foods that they would normally. And that's presenting yet another barrier for them to connect with food in a more positive way.
So we see that basically grandma is worried by the end of part one. Like, she is worried about all of these problems that have been brought up to her by her like noticing like the behavior at home. So the end of this part one, I feel, really leaves us with that curiosity of knowing, well, where's grandma gonna take this, right? Because like at the end, we see how curious she is. She wants to talk about it with everyone. She wants to know like if people have the same problems, and if they did, then she wants to know like what solutions have they implemented. And so I think that it just leaves us with that like bit of curiosity for us to being able to like then like think about like what's gonna happen, what is she gonna do, like like is she gonna bring a solution.
I think I was just thinking about how that really, this knowledge of that she's bringing to the table, and now we can re-examine it under this academic lens and say, well, grandma, when she was gathering the food, like you were discussing, and she had a connection to that, it was probably, here we talk about micronutrients. Was it, did it ripen on a truck on the way here, or did it ripen on a vine? And I think most of our grandparents are going to remember the ripening on the vine, that smell and those textures that show us what food is good when food is good. And I think now when we re-examine it under that academic lens and we say, well, wow, all of these things that we just took for granted as process and routine for canning or by heating tomatoes to get the other nutrients out of them and those sorts of things, then when we can now take those, we don't take them for granted as much. I think we should just really appreciate and realize that those old methods that had been developed through years of practice and testing, essentially, that got them to understand preservation, and then all of a sudden we took science and said, well, let's try something different. And we all forgot. But I think that it's really interesting to have her bring us back to that, and then we can take a look at it and say, well, she's actually doing everything that's better for the environment instinctively, because that was a better method. And then now we're trying to adapt it to today, which is interesting,
Yeah, totally. And when the family is kind of confronted with this, they prevent very real issues that a lot of families face in terms of trying to, seek out something healthier. Not enough time, we don't know where to go, and these are problems that a lot of families struggle with, like all the time, and it is kind of, how can I say, it's something that can be easily fixed with just a little bit of help. But also when you have an immigrant family coming to a new area, there's like another set of challenges in terms of like trying to seek out places that you can navigate really well, language being one of them. And Sarah, you had wanted to touch on that for a moment.
Yes, thank you so much, Ben. So I think that also here in part one, we are seeing how this family has a language barrier. And so that is something that I was able to bring into the table because like I have experienced that firsthand with my parents. I have seen that it is not easy when you arrive to a country where you don't know the language, and sometimes there are some people that they are not willing to make an effort to try and work with you and understand you. And so I think that that just adds a barrier of frustration, right? Because not only can you not communicate for like your basic needs, but then you're also not able to have that social part that like we know is so important in everyone's lives.
Yeah, I think the imagery and us depicting the poor connection to the community is a commonality amongst immigrant families and amongst those who are not immigrant families, because it's difficult sometimes to move to a new community. And I think that these issues that we're trying to tackle here really help understand that our food system has many barriers to it, and language is one of those, because if we are unable to connect with our community, I mean, just for an example here is COVID and getting information to communities of different languages about the safety of vaccinations and those sorts of things. If you are able to understand and learn this in your own language, then convincing you to do something radical is going to be difficult. So trying to connect with your community is an integral part for us to be having a stronger relationship with our food, because our food is grown in our community.
And I think, like you said, it's even harder if you don't know about the programs that are in place, right? For like local food, sustainable food. Like even like as much as you want to be sustainable, like if you are not able to communicate, then like you're never gonna be aware of like all these like cool initiatives that we're gonna see throughout the book that are implemented. Well, right now we're talking about the Waterloo region. So yeah, so like programs that are implemented in this region that can actually help people. And I think just overall, right, like if you don't know that there's like whatever entity that can help you with something, then you're never gonna get that help, and maybe like things are not gonna get better. And so I think once again, like we can just see how like this just reinforces loneliness, frustration from the side of the immigrant family.
Yeah, and I think as your readers will see throughout the story, Granny is kind of acting as a wake-up call for the family and hopefully for the readers also, right? We're trying to bring these issues that we're talking about in this podcast, and we'll continue to talk about different issues. We're trying to bring these issues to light, and we're kind of doing it through Granny. Granny is kind of opening the eyes to all these issues for the family, and maybe they're not connecting the dots of why their food system is a little broken for their family, but Granny's going to help them through it, and hopefully is going to help the readers through it. And that's kind of our goal for the book, and that's how we're planning to continue on for all the chapters, and that's kind of how we're going through the eyes of Granny, I guess, for our book.
Totally, yeah. And so as we get towards the kind of end of the first chapter here, we know that Granny's worried. Her kids are not involved, and her family's not involved at all with the process in a way that resembles anything like what she grew up with. And she comes back to her apartment building and starts to discuss with some of the other grandparents in her building. and they start to realize that their families are having the same issues. And so together they start plotting and scheming what could be done about all of this, because they feel that they have this responsibility to show their families how things could be different. And that is where we will continue from. What did they come up with? How are they going to solve this problem together? So stay tuned for the next episode to find out. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll be back with the next part of the Picnic Blanket Podcast.